All right, so let's talk about media coverage here. Andrew, I want to mention that even George Friedman of Stratfor recently pointed out that whenever something like this happens, the media assumes that these are Democratic reformers because they're speaking to the ones who speak English, only the ones who speak English, and the media gets so excited over any demonstration that involves Twitter or Facebook. But could that perhaps sort of skew the message? Are we only getting one side of the story here?
Absolutely. You have to look at this in terms of the general strategy of democracy promotion. The idea of promoting democracy for America is promoting the American brand of democracy, which is essentially democracy incorporated. Now, this is supported by the media. We saw this through the color revolutions in Eastern Europe, but also through the democratization of Latin America, getting rid of the dictators, putting in US-sponsored democracies, which had a backlash with the awakening there in terms of populist democracies. Now, the media, in terms of the current issue, is a little schizophrenic. They don't really know whether to support Mubarak or to promote democracy because, as a major Council on Foreign Relations report released in 2005 indicated, which is about promoting democracy in the Arab world, they favored evolution, not revolution. Now, the problem is that these revolutions coming up, America's trying to manipulate the situation. Now, if you look at media coverage of Tunisia, for the first 4 weeks of these protests, there was barely any coverage. Only until President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali fled Tunisia did they congratulate the Tunisians on democracy. But just a week prior, the French foreign minister was saying, we will help Ben Ali with our know-how in cracking down on these rabble-rousers. You know, so they're trying to figure out where to place themselves, but so are the U.S. elite themselves.
Adrian, you're sitting over here nodding, but you know, Andrew said that the media coverage is sort of schizophrenic, but some of the statements that we've heard from the State Department seem to be that way as well. When we think about intervention, is there going to be any military intervention from other countries, especially if we think about the Suez? No.
Well, I would hope that there wouldn't be military intervention, and I don't think that there would be at this stage. It seems like the U.S. spokespeople have shifted, as you mentioned, in their position from strongly supporting Mubarak to recognizing that this has turned and there's no going back, that Mubarak is going to end up getting thrown out, and so that they have to stay on the winning side. The difficulty for the United States is that Mubarak is what is really the key that they see has been holding Israel in place. And as such, Mubarak and his regime have been complicit in oppressing the Palestinian people as well. And there's this fear that that if Mubarak, who has been receiving these vast amount of military dollars from the United States in order to oppress his own people so that he can, which is a key part in maintaining this quote-unquote stability with Israel, if that's lost, then there is a fear that Israel won't be as protected as it has been in the region, and and Israel has shown itself to be a loose cannon in the past, and so, but I wouldn't expect any military to go in at this point. In particular, when just an hour or two ago, the Egyptian military publicly declared that it will not be attacking protesters. In effect, that it is on the side of the protesters, and the Egyptian military, because of U.S. funding, is incredibly powerful. So I would say no, we shouldn't expect any sort of invasion.
And also, it's interesting to point out that Egypt has withdrawn most of its security forces along the Gaza Strip as well. But here's another point that I have to mention. The Daily Telegraph recently came up with an article that basically says that the American government was sort of secretly backing some of the leading figures throughout this in this opposition movement for the past 3 years. This is also something that came out when WikiLeaks released some of their cables. Why would they do this? I mean, isn't this a problem for the United States? What's going on now?
Well, the U.S. is hedging its bets. The U.S. has a tendency to fund both those in power and the opposition, because that way, either way, it wins. And there has been a sense, in particular over the past decade, with increasing protests, increasing uprisings, including the April 6th movement in 2008, which turned out to be a failure, but which is what one of the more powerful student movements is called now. And in particular, the independent the growth of the independent labor unions in Egypt. And so there's a recognition on the part of the State Department that there's great discontent in Egypt, that there have been riots, that there's a potential for the overthrow of this dictator who they've kept in power for 30 years. Recognizing that, it's important to the State Department to make sure that whoever's going to come and take his place will also be an ally of the United States.
That's a very interesting point, Andrew. On the one hand, praising Mubarak, but on the other hand, for several years now, sort of having these activists come to the United States.
Absolutely, and as the professor said, she's absolutely correct. It's about hedging your bets. They see what's coming. They have to position themselves accordingly so that when democracy incorporated takes place, they have their guy in there. And I think that's why Mohamed al-Baradi is in Egypt right now. An interesting note about al-Baradi is that he's on the board of the International Crisis Group, which is a pro-democracy promotion group connected to major globalist and American elites such as George Soros and actually Zbigniew Brzezinski himself. So getting connections with all these activists, that's America's way of ensuring that whoever comes in the transition they support. The problem they're facing now is that by publicly wobbling back and forth on who to support, they're actually alienating a lot of these democracy promoters that they've been supporting, and the people on the ground don't necessarily support al-Baradi. They don't know what to think of him. The Muslim Brotherhood, who has also built connections with the American embassy, has supported al-Baradi, but the people themselves don't know. The real danger here for America is if a populist democracy arises, because public opinion in the Arab world is very much against America, against Israel, and for Iran. And so they cannot allow populist democracy. If you want to see America's reaction to what they think of populist democracy, look at Haiti. That's what they think of populist democracy. They punish populations for wanting liberation and freedom and to have people representing the people. They cannot support that type of democracy. So they want safe democracy, which is a democracy they control. The problem is that it's very unstable now, and they don't know who to support.
That's a very interesting point. And, speaking of control, I want to mention this issue because it's pretty underreported, if reported at all. The United States gives Egypt over $1 billion a year in aid. But at the same time, Egypt is employing U.S. lobbyists. Some names that come up are Tony Podesta, Bob Livingston. Do we know anything about whether or not they've been involved in what's going on right now in Egypt or what their role is? Because it seems like such a vicious cycle here. We're giving them money. Are they taking this money and then employing American lobbyists to help them out on the Hill?
Well, that's the same thing Israel does. That's the same thing many of these countries do, that America subsidizes their militaries and they hire lobbyists to ensure that this subsidy continues. It's a way that they have of ensuring this relationship carries on. Because Mubarak would not be where he is if it weren't for the United States. That's just a fact. Militarily, economically, politically, he is their guy. This is how all dictatorships generally function and how most of these governments function. They have to ensure the relationship with the godfather, America, continues. So they have to put some of the money back in to lobbying America, to lobbying politicians, making sure Congress doesn't, take any wrong directions in terms of funding and appropriations. So it's a two-way street. The money goes in, but much smaller portions of the money come out and continue in lobbying. It's just this back and forth codependency.
Adrian, one final thought, very briefly. What happens next?
What happens next? Well,
it's $1 million question, right?
Well, clearly Mubarak's reign is over. This is going to continue until he leaves. In particular, now with the statements of the military that they're no longer going to oppress the people, or that they're not going to engage in this. What happens next, though, is the big question. Are we going to see a populist democracy that will threaten the United States, as Andrew mentioned, or are we going to see another U.S.-imposed dictator? I deeply hope that we will see, a real some sort of real democracy. I mean, if anybody is the hero in this, it is the people of Egypt who have risen up. There's a lot of people have said on the ground ground that there is no one leader in this movement. And that needs to be taken seriously outside rather than trying to impose any, one ideal person that we think is appropriate for Egyptians. Egyptians need to speak for themselves.
Right, that's a very interesting point. Adrienne Pine, professor at American University, thank you so much. And over in Canada, we have Andrew Gavin Marshall from the Center for Research on Globalization. Thank you both so much for being here and, of course, for your analysis.